in the chat. So we'd love you to have say hi to us in the chat function, and we've also got a Q&A function as well. Emma's just started the recording, and so we'll start off with that. Okay, I'm going to go over to Ronald for the moment and ask Ronald to welcome us to this session and start things off completely.
Thank you, Jo. Good day, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, where you are. Nice that you are here. Thanks for being here, and welcome at the first masterclass of Lifelong Learning Catalyst, initiative from the Dutch government in making lifelong learning more normal in the Netherlands and the role of public institutions in that. My name is Ronald Klein, and together with Jo and with Emma, who is also present, I'm part of the International Insights team, doing international research in the practices that are all over the world in lifelong learning. And our goal is to learn and to share, to learn from the rest of the world and to share with the rest of the world our experience. And we would like to hear the experience of other countries which have similar challenges on lifelong learning, but have chosen different solutions. And that's what we want to do today as well, to share with you challenges on what universities and University of Applied Sciences and VET have in lifelong learning, and have a discussion on that. And that's the first of three masterclasses, first of several masterclasses. 3 are already planned. The next one is next week. It will be on alumni. And this week we will talk about transforming our institutes. Lifelong Learning Catalyst is a temporary organization of about 6 years with the goal to change lifelong learning in the Netherlands and make it more normal, just like I said. And in this endeavor, we are doing several things in the Netherlands and abroad. Welcome here that you are here. Really nice. Jo is our excellent team member, who is our international researcher. She will be hosting today. She will be moderating today. So I will give the word to Jo. I wish you all a really nice masterclass. Enjoy. Thanks for being here. And the floor is yours, Jo.
Thanks so much, Ronald. And welcome to everybody to this first in the masterclass, hopefully not the last. Welcome to everyone joining from across the hemispheres. I'm thankful that there is still room for cooperation and appreciation of our different strengths in this time of division and violence around the world. So welcome to our online audience too. Thank you all for turning up. And thanks to Emma and to Ronald and all our other colleagues at Catalyst for supporting and making this possible. Welcome to Roos as well to start it off. So to start us all off and to situate this conversation, particularly but not exclusively for our Antipodean friends, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands we meet together from, to pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous peoples with us today. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of these countries. And wherever we are in the world, we acknowledge the shoulders we sit upon, developing our knowledge and practice, and in the retelling and rehearing of stories that remind us of our custodianship for this tiny moment in time and for the old wisdoms from which we hope to build new expertises. So that's where we are, situating us. I'd like to ask each of our wonderful panel members to introduce themselves, just give your name and your university name and what makes your university brilliantly distinctive. And because we want to get into our discussions and everyone should have the bios in the explainer notes, the bios for the people and the universities, I'd love you to do this in a beautifully brief minute or less, please. So I've got our magnificent 7 of presenters with us. I think we'll go in alphabetical order, and I'm going to start with Felix first, if that's okay. Felix, and then Giselle, and then Jacob, and then Judith, and Kevin, Carly, Rob. So Felix, over to you, sir.
Sure. Thanks, Jo. Good day to all. Good morning, good evening, wherever, depending on where you are today. My name is Felix van Urk. I'm head of education policy based at the strategy and policy department at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. Our university prides itself as the entrepreneurial university. We traditionally have had a lot of spin-off firms that used our technology on the ground in our own region immediately. And that is still the basis of our DNA today. We are not only driven by intellectual curiosity, but merely by the societal challenges that we face in our region and the world. So I concur with all the statements you made, Joe.
Brilliant. Thanks, Felix. And to Giselle next. Can we bring Giselle into the screen?
Koutou katoa ngā mihi nui ki a koutou in the indigenous Māori language of Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I am from and where I am based. That is greetings to everyone today and delighted to be here. I'm the provost at Massey University here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Massey has a distinctive mission and purpose in the New Zealand tertiary education sector. We turn 100 next year, and for the last 60 years we have been the leader in providing distance education, not just here in Aotearoa but around the world. Where we have 3 physical campuses across the country. We service students around the globe. We are a research intensive university in the top 2% worldwide, and have research strengths ranging from veterinary science and agriculture all the way through to creative arts. So flexibility, accessibility, equity and access are really our values. Lovely to be here. Kia ora.
Thanks, Giselle. And over to Jakob. Jakob, you're on mute, sir.
Hello to you all. My name is Jakob de Boer. I represent the Radboud University situated in the eastern part of the Netherlands. We are a generic broad university, but the last couple of 20, I say maybe even 30, 40 years, we have kept investing in lifelong education. And that has positioned ourselves in that we have a very solid position in lifelong learning. But nowadays we need more integrated approach. So I think one of our unique settings now is that we have a bottom-up approach, how we can really implement lifelong learning from the core of our university, and we don't have to spend that much time to have discussions about all the difficulties of implementing this within our organization. So I think we can add something to the discussions today about our bottom-up approach.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jakob. And I'll move now to our next J, which is Judith.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Judith Sachs. I was Senior Deputy Vice Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University. I left the university sector 6 years ago, and I'm now the Chief Academic Officer for a company called Studiosity. Studiosity is a student success company that was established 25 years ago, and we are now have partners in the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia. So we have grown over the past 25 years. We, importantly, unlike Turnitin or Grammarly, our focus is help, not answers, and the focus is about student learning and improving students' capability to write academic work through immediate online feedback.
Brilliant. Thank you, Judith. Very succinct. Wonderful. Then to Kevin, and then we'll move over to the next Kylie. Kevin, hi.
Thanks, Joe. Budirina Gudi Warami. I just said good evening and welcome the language of the Darug people, traditional owners in the lands where I'm located, which is in Western Sydney, because I am from Western Sydney University, where our university spread across 11 campuses in the suburbs of the city. A university with about 50,000 students. I have the pleasure of being the Executive Dean for the Faculty of Arts, Social Sciences, Education, Business and Law. About half the university. I was previously the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic Transformation and Provost, and before that a Pro Vice Chancellor Research, and before that a Dean. Substantively a Professor of Geography and Urban Studies, and my research areas are in ethnic relations and the settlement of immigrant groups in Sydney. Our university is all about impact, translation. Indeed, we were the #1 university ranked in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings for 4 years in a row. And that's an external judgment of our commitment to translation and impact and access. So for us, that manifests as training the professions of our region. So the social workers, the nurses, the doctors, the lawyers, police, counsellors and allied health workers across our region. And of course, we have a lot of pride in our Indigenous access programs. I know that that's something that our colleagues want to have a bit of a chat about as well. So we have some ambitions in that area, but that's under a minute what we're about.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. To the point. Wonderful work. And to Kylie. Hi, Kylie.
Thank you, Joe, and hello, colleagues. It's lovely to be here. I geographically sit just alongside Kevin but I'm in the centre of Sydney at the University of Technology, Sydney, where I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor academic. I think it's great to have the two of us here from Sydney because it actually speaks to different foci, different intentions. So we're a University of Technology, and that's our focus. So our 3 big themes are creative, innovative, and technologically focused. And we have big programs in engineering, IT, science, but also creative practice, transdisciplinarity, and so on. Also, about 50,000 students strong. About 25% of those are international students coming from a variety of places across the world. So I'm very pleased to be here, very excited to be part of this conversation about lifelong learning. I have been an educator all of my professional life, 3 degrees in education and educational leadership. And so I've moved through a range of different contexts, high school and so on, working in teacher education and then in central leadership roles for learning and teaching, and now the academic role. So this is a really great conversation for me, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kylie. And bringing it full circle back to the Netherlands, Rob.
Good morning. My name is Rob Verhofstadt. I'm not sure if I'm already audible. Yeah, my name is Rob Verhofstadt. I'm president of the Han University of Applied Sciences, which is a University of Applied Sciences in the east of the Netherlands, very close to Radboud University, by the way, we talked to earlier. And besides that, I'm also a member of the executive board of the LLL Catalyst organization that was introduced by earlier. And lastly, I'm also a member of the board of the Union of the University of Applied Sciences of the Netherlands. And I love to talk about lifelong learning, learning about your insights and how we can make this thing work, because it's not a nice to have, but a must have, I would say.
Wonderful, Rob. Thank you so much. Succinct and to the point. Great. So I'm Emma. I'm just going to talk at everybody for a couple of minutes, and just to frame a discussion of why we're all here. First of all, just to the how of the session. My suggested kind of rules of play for this are that I invite all of our panelists to be frank, to be open, to obviously respectful, and to stay focused on looking for what works. I guess the other part is a reminder that we come here with 2 hats, that we're here all as leaders and also as learners. So please bring your confidence and your curiosity and your experience and also your openness. How the session will work, I'll start off with a couple of framing questions, which will allow our panelists to really get into the why, the philosophical locating of lifelong learning in the universities, and then the structural, the organisational, and where does it situate? And then we'll open things up to a wide variety of questions. I'm hoping to get questions from you, our wonderful audience, and also from our panelists to one another. We've got about 90 minutes today, and that's really where we go to. So my aim is that, well, I guess, where do we think about what is this session intended for? Well, the idea for this session really came about whilst I was working in Australia last year, and it was really kind of listening in on the many conversations around me that seemed to be talking about the endless and competing pressures and problems affecting universities. And the way it was being framed was, it sounded like adapting for and building lifelong learning provision was kind of yet another pressure that we needed to adapt to. And I was listening to this and I thought, well, this will make a really interesting, this tension would make a really interesting start point for a discussion between leaders who need to manage all of these competing tensions. But then as I thought about it, I realized that that wasn't sitting well with me. I realized I'd kind of lapsed into zero-sum, either-or thinking, and actually there was a different way to view this, one of kind of complementarity. And this really came from the idea that if businesses and other organizations see lifelong learning as a means to meeting their productivity and skills ends, maybe universities do too. So to say that introducing and building lifelong learning is not a competing pressure, but maybe a potential enabler of adapting and becoming the universities that we need to be for our learners today and tomorrow. And also kind of this, I don't know, frankly, I'm a bit over the doom and gloom, what's wrong with us type of discussions that are so prevalent in media and discourse today. I really wanted to focus on what's working and what's good, and how can we do more of this? So how can we build from the successes that we're having to have more success in the future and through this adaptation of lifelong learning? I'd love us to leave today with a little bit more optimism and maybe some inspiration and maybe a few alliances or potential collaborations in the offing, so that together we can kind of make this change for good as we need to. So final bit of framing, really, as we know that in all of our countries, the nature of work, the nature of living, what people want, what societies need from us, our demographics, all of it's shifting. That's not new. Yes, there are threats, but there could also be tremendous opportunity, potentially an expansion of what Edward Venning last year called the addressable market, meaning it's not just young people who want to learn, but it's all adults throughout life. It's a stimulus to fulfill our societal missions differently, to create new types of learning provision. Things are being shaken up, yes, and cracks have appeared in long-held assumptions about what a university education looks like. Cracks that allow new ways of serving new learners to emerge. So what we're seeing now is many, many visible changes, and we've started to talk to those already. Some of those things might be new products like micro-credentials or trans provider programs, university industry co-branded modules. There are heaps of them. And these are interesting to look at. But actually, I think what's more useful is understanding the less visible transformations and the less visible adaptations that go on in order to create these visible products that we see. And there are a myriad of these. So the masterclass today really is about focusing and showcasing some of these less visible internal adaptations that make our universities better able to serve what learners really need and want, and are about universities being both responsible and also responsive. The second reason is to support one another to make the right changes, learning from those first adopters, leapfrogging change that didn't work, and working smarter together to enable at-scale, right thinking, right way progress. So that's really it for me. The last thing is a couple of reminders from our Indigenous leadership perspective that I gleaned last year from colleagues at Massey, actually. One, that university leadership is really about ensuring universities are continually evolving and that we don't become relics stuck in a time and place of the past, valued for past reputations. And secondly, in the Indigenous way, the metaphor or the story that I heard was that lifelong learning is like the Milky Way. It's a long pathway that fills the skies of our lives. And universities offer a few constellations, a few stars in there, not the whole sky, but a few. And so really today, I'd like to focus on what's shining brightly and what's working and what can we do more of. So that's my preamble. That hopefully opens up some thinking around this and keeps that kind of relentless focus on what's working. I'm going to open up the question to all of our panelists, the first question, which is really the kind of philosophical location of lifelong learning. It's a term that's being used today and frequently in the discourse, and it's kind of one of those floating signifiers. It means many things to many people. For some people, it's completely meaningless. But really, I'd love to ask each of you, what does lifelong learning mean to you at your university? What does it encompass? And who and what is it for? What's its purpose? What's the end game of it? Do you even call it lifelong learning? If not, then what do you call it? And how central or not is it to your university's mission? So I'm now off the screen, hooray. We should have everybody on the screen. Yes, brilliant. Okay, does anyone want to, I could offer that to you in random order, but does anybody feel like they'd like to jump in there and pick that one up first? If not, I should be cruel and pick on someone. Giselle, you're smiling at me from the top corner, and so is Rob. I'm going to go to Giselle and then to Rob and then to Jakob.
Kia ora, thanks, Joe. So look, it's a great question because Massey University is really defined by the concept of lifelong learning, although we don't use that terminology. So my university, about 28,000 students, 60% and growing, of whom choose to study flexibly from around the country and around the world. And about 70% of our learners are above the age of 25, which in our country is considered a mature student. That sits in some tension in the context of a tertiary education system where even by its nomenclature, we talk about tertiary education in my country, not higher education, which in itself implies there's a secondary, primary, tertiary linear progression of education. And then at the end of the, university education, tertiary education, vocational education, somehow your education is complete. And we know that that's not the case. So Massey University is absolutely distinguished in our sector by having a very broad range of learners who choose to come in and out of our system. That's despite the way in which the policy metrics and the funding metrics are designed, because they are almost entirely designed around qualification completion and around retention metrics and course completion metrics and so on. So in spite of those limiting factors, we are strongly committed to ensuring through the provision of an accredited program, through micro-credentials, through short course provision, and through work integrated learning, where we've been doing a lot of work, not just in the professional qualifications, but in other areas for a number of years, that we're seeking to embrace the concept of lifelong learning, although, as I say, we don't talk about that phrase. I'm really interested in the fact that in our latest tertiary education strategy that was released late last year, the New Zealand government through the Ministry of Education spoke about lifelong learning. And I'm excited about that because there's the possibility there that it signals there might be some shift in terms of the way in which policy settings and the funding parameters are designed to really drive a culture of lifelong learning. That would be a massive change in terms of how universities in this country are funded, because the incentives currently are set up towards those other kind of metrics and deliverables. But just in a nutshell, colleagues, the concept means a huge amount to my university and absolutely characterises who we are. But that is in spite of the kind of operating environment that as an institution we're seeking to navigate. We know that our learners and our students are demanding lifelong learning in all sorts of ways. We have to catch up in terms of their demand for mobility, their demand for flexibility and transportability around the tertiary education system, from higher education, university providers through vocational providers and so on. So that's just a starter for 10, Joe. Thank you.
Marvellous, thank you. So transportability, mobility, flexibility, and for mature people moving in and out in all directions in a relatively unsupported way. Thanks, Giselle. Rob, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I would also like to add to this a more maybe a sort of philosophical approach of what does lifelong learning mean for a university, not of today, but also for the future university that we would like to evolve to. And it is, of course, we have like the classical task of preparing our students for their jobs, their professional, the professional development. That's for sure. That will always be part of our responsibility. We also prepare our students for a life in the world as a sort of citizen. Just the world citizenship. That's something that will always be very important. And what we add to this is that we also need to prepare our students for a lifelong learning. And that sounds like logical, but that's not something we classically have done. So this is something that we need to develop, that as a student, you need to understand that after graduating, nothing has ended, but it's only a start of a new phase, and you'll always have to keep on your learning and to renew your knowledge and renew your skills and adapt to a new situation, and also take the responsibility for your own career the rest of your life. So this is a sort of new thing to us. So it's a mental note to self. We need to include this in the way we do our work as a University of Applied Sciences. This is from the university's point of view, but if you look at the society, we can clearly see by just looking at the numbers, looking at the figures, that society cannot evolve without really making lifelong learning work. If I just take one topic, which is very important in the region where our university is stated, which is energy transition. It's not unique. I know that many places are working with this. But if I just look at energy transition, and if I then look at the numbers of what they need in order to fulfill their vacancies, then only this number is larger than the total number of diplomas I will deliver in the upcoming 5 years. And of course, we understand that we cannot bring all our students to the energy transition because we do have other challenges as well, as you can understand. So also simply looking at the figures, we must understand that by just focusing on our initial education, we will not deliver enough human capital in order to face the enormous challenges we have. So from two sides, we understand that lifelong learning is a must-have and not something we just can see as a sort of hobby for some people interested.
Super, thanks, Rob. So that whole mindset shift is what we're getting towards there, and then there's this kind of, the unchallengeable demands of society that we need more people with more different skills all the time. So Jakob, I'll go to you, and then to Kevin, and then to Felix.
Well, in addition to what Gazelle and Rob already have stated, I think that one of the choices that we within Radboud have been making the last couple of 2 years is that yes, we can have philosophical discussions about what lifelong learning is all about or how you should define it. But I think we have left that discussion a little bit to the behind and try to be practical as well. And what can we do? What are our strong points now in our organization, and what can we do? And one of our choices that we have at least made for the short term is that we focus on education for professionals. And then I would like to go back to what Rob just said. The challenges that, for example, the energy sector faces in the whole of the world, but especially also in our region, is what can we do to be really a external partner for our companies and institutions around us. And I think that is where our university and maybe universities in general have something to develop. It's not usual, it's not normal for us to be a development partner, an HR development partner for organizations around us, and that's where we are setting our energy on. So we have reshaped the definition, not of lifelong learning, because that's what it is, but we have focused on education for professionals and are now trying to build up bottom up from all several departments that we already have for maybe 30-40 years, and try to combine all the networks that we have. So we create a new reality. So we are not talking about theoretical discussions, but we are trying to make it practical and go outside, have discussions with companies, have discussions with other universities, have discussions with the government, and in that way we just setting up projects, and from that projects we are trying to learn how can we reorganize ourselves to do it better next time. So that's maybe it's not a theoretical approach, but it's a fairly practical approach.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. We seem to have lost Rob for an instant. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin. I'm not quite sure what there. But so that idea that we really need to tackle this as a practical issue, and that's something which is really something we can do something about with the resources that we already have. Thank you. Over then to Kevin, and then to Felix, and then to Kylie and Judith.
Right. And I have to be careful not to cover everything that Kylie might want to say as well, but I'm sure she'll have a little bit of background. We're in the second term of a left of centre national government that has a commitment to harmonisation of the education sector, and that includes particularly transition between what you would call the vocational sector of education, and for most of us, and certainly in New South Wales, that's our technical and further education system, TAFE. I'll put these acronyms in the chat for people, but our TAFE system, and the transition and connection with universities. And so that's a first thing of our current Minister for Higher Education, a passion of his. The second is access. And in Australia, we did for a short while, our principal means of lifting tertiary education participation was a demand-driven system that we had for about 5 years. In other words, we would be paid by the government for whatever students we took. But that ended in 2017, and we've been in a capped environment ever since, and we are more and more every month, every 6 months, more regulated in terms of our student intake than we were before. But having said that, a recent announcement from our minister is that we will be uncapped, in other words, demand driven, for low socioeconomic students and for Indigenous students, First Nation students. So this is some of the political context that we're working through. And I can say more later, but our principal focus has been to, and this is my answer to the lifelong learning bit, is transition from technical education into higher education has been one of our foci, and employability, to pick up on some of the points that have already been made. So I won't restate those, but that's a similarity for us. So our emphasis in the lifelong learning area is to aid transition from the tertiary from the vocational sector, and to ensure as much as possible transferability and employability.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, you've summed it all already up for me. Wonderfully done. Thank you. And so from Kevin, we go to Felix.
Yes, and thanks, Joe. I'm going to try to keep it brief because much has been said, and I'm very interested in what Judith and Kylie have to say as well. I think in our university, it means different things for different people. And I think that matches what Jacob referred to earlier, that in the Netherlands, you see a common sort of bottom-up approach where the traditional academia engages with lifelong learning. I think it's balancing three genuine needs that we should, I guess, tackle simultaneously. And the first one was mentioned by Rob. It's the clear demand for more people in the workforce that we can actually cater for with our traditional first initial students, as I would call them. But second, there's also the need for universities transform, and that is sometimes referred to with the concept of a fourth generation, nowadays even fifth generation university, where you invite society much more than previously in co-designing and defining what your education, but also your research and your innovation activities are supposed to be like. And lifelong learning for many in our university, including mostly our research institute staff, it is mostly about that, getting people to co-innovate with you and all those things. And then there's the third one that Kevin just mentioned, is the sort of vaguing of the traditional boundaries that have a lot of societal hierarchy elements to them between vocational education and what we still call higher education. And And I think our university, I had a lot of discomfort at first that we seem to not pick one of those horses and say that's what we are about, because I saw some universities in this country, but also probably in yours as well, bet on a horse and become market leader in those, and we didn't necessarily do that. And I'm getting much more comfortable recently with the fact that all three of them do require effort, and if you respect what universities have traditionally been, even though you want to change that, you do realize that when people that do their work on the ground with students, with learners, and with research and innovation teams, to have them integrate more and more towards those ecosystems and build it up that way might not necessarily get us the extreme pace that we as strategists like to see, but might actually be the right route. So I think it is about three things, and in our university we still do cover all those three, and I value them at equal levels, to be frank. Yeah, that's what I have to add, Joe, to what was previously said.
Brilliant, thanks, Felix. And I'd love to hear more shortly about how those are complementary to one another and how they support one another in the traditions, because I think we are touching so far on many of the big themes: mindsets, technical, bottom up, drivers, etc. There. Over to Kylie and then to Judith. What does lifelong learning mean in your institutes?
Thank you. I'm just going to try and pick up on a couple of things. A lot of university funding in Australia is, as Kevin mentioned, governed by the way the university funds each individual student, the opportunities that are presented by that. So sometimes there is a tension between your social kind of and ethical obligations to students and where the money is coming from. At our university, about 85% of our income comes from coursework students who are undertaking a degree qualification. We have done a range of, I would call them experiments over time. So I'm just going to focus on not the pathways and not the entry into university from a range of different places, but actually think about how do we do what in some other universities might be called executive education, or kind of short forms of learning, or things like that. We have had short forms of learning for a number of years, and when they became popular, micro-credentials and so on is what I mean by that. We did a lot of experimentation, a lot of let's put things on the platform and see who buys them at a unit by unit level. Let's have a platform that encourages people who are in the workforce who need a quick upskill opportunity to do that. Over time, we have come to understand that that's probably not the best way to do that. And in terms of engaging with people who want shorter forms of learning, we have really focused our attention on what we call enterprise learning, which is business to business collaborations, where we create bespoke programs and short forms of learning, micro-credentials and other things that meet an employer need at scale. Because for us as a University of Technology in the centre of the city, partnering is really critical. So partner with big companies sometimes and small companies other times. We have a partnership with the New South Wales Government, with New South Wales TAFE, Technical and Further Education, as Kevin mentioned before, and Microsoft to offer a range of digital skills that uplift workers across a range of different organisations. And that is a big workforce need in New South Wales. We are well short of what we need in that respect. So we have found much more value and benefit in terms of partnerships that are multifaceted if that enterprise learning opportunity is one part of an external engagement and partnership opportunity that we have with a company, whether it be big or small or whatever, where we can also potentially have research opportunities, work integrated learning opportunities, internships and so on. So there's a suite of things, and enterprise learning is one aspect of that. Sometimes it's the thing we start with. Other times we start with a research partnership and then it expands as we get to know each other and as we get to work together. That's not a huge part of our overall offering, but it is a really important part, and it's where we do lots of testing, where we strengthen opportunities, where we make ourselves known domestically. So these are only domestic offerings. We've thought about offering them internationally, but that's probably a whole other kettle of fish that we haven't stepped into at this time. So the enterprise learning opportunity is a really interesting way of conceptualizing lifelong learning, and making sure that we're not only meeting the needs of learners, but of partners that are kind of more at that enterprise level in our sphere of influence, I would say. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Lots of interesting things there. I'm really just speaking to the idea of co-design and the iterative nature of relationships. I'm reminded of something from Munster Technological University when we were talking to those earlier last year, around how engagement comes first. It's all about engagement. And if lifelong learning emerges out of that, that's great. But actually the main thing is building the relationships, and that's the platform from which everything else occurs. I'm also curious, a further question perhaps a bit later, around how does that B2B work, enterprise learning work, with the myriad of SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises and micro enterprises, which make up the bulk of our economies. So yeah, further food for thought there, but thank you. Judith, you could speak from any perspective on this, given the amount of universities you dip in and out of. But as you traverse the world, and particularly the Australian world, what is lifelong learning? What are people talking about when they're talking about lifelong learning? What are they meaning? And where does it sit with them?
Well, let me start off by saying I'm an outsider compared to the insiders, but I'm an outsider with an insider's knowledge and experience and a perspective. So I sort of boundary cross from time to time, but essentially I'm invariably on the outside. Studiosity doesn't deliver programs, but we support students to be successful by building confidence and by building their skills. So in fact, our social enterprise is about facilitating student success. But in terms of lifelong learning, I think in the current context, which is sort of fluid and ambiguous, it's a really strong opportunity to rethink learning, both formal and informal, and for us to reimagine the how and the what of what sort of society we want, what we think the future of work will be like, what sort of citizens we want to produce as well. So I think that sort of opportunity of reimagination is really important. And it's at the individual and the collective level. But I think in terms of the things that we need to look at, and particularly in the opportunity, we need to be bold enough to reimagine and rethink what lifelong learning means. And it's contextual. It's contextual to the institution. It's contextual to the society. It's contextual to the students that we are focusing on. So they might be school leavers. They might be people who are coming back to education. They're people who might want to reskill, upskill, change skills. So one of the principles that it should focus on is on innovation. And I think all too often we're a little cautious about innovation. It's one of those shifting signifiers. The university I used to work with was called Macquarie University, Australia's Innovative University. Well, it was at one stage, 53 years ago when it was established, but, you know, it's sort of trying to discern who it is at the moment in a highly competitive environment, both local, because it's also in Sydney, but also in Australia. It's also about balancing political will and regulatory reform. And so to be imaginative, to be innovative, how do you balance those two factors that are really shaping education policy and education practice? And as Kylie said, it's fundamentally about relationships. It's about relationships between industry, it's relationships between government, it's relationships between students, it's relationships between various institutions as well. So, and part of that sort of fluidity that I think that we need to develop is, rather than competing against each other and competing with each other, let's see some opportunities where we can grow together to be innovative, creative, and balanced, so that we actually have something to say in a political environment that really is regulatory and essentially conservative. Voila.
Great, thanks, Judith. What a great pull together. I mean, I think what I draw from there, one is the boldness and the courage and the need to work together. But coming back to those pluralities of meanings, we use the same words, but they mean different things to different people. And if we're going to have serious conversations and engage with different people, we need to understand what their meanings are and how do we bring those together. Coming back to one of the points you made earlier, which is really about the rethinking and the innovation and what's happening there and how are we doing that in practice? Where does whatever is happening whether in lifelong learning, whether we call it enterprise learning, education for professionals, micro-credentials, whatever, where does it sit? And this speaks to the risk aversion or risk appetite of our universities. For some, it sits at the outside where it can't touch the core, stable core. For some, it's really integrated throughout. So I'm really interested to bring this now into Jakob, and I might ask you to start with this, the practical domain of where is lifelong learning sitting? How is it integrating with our existing systems? And really getting to the crux of where we're at with this masterclass is, what is it changing when we're making these innovations? What is it doing to promotion systems? Are we rewarding people? Are we able to reward people for their commitment to making an impact on societies for lifelong learning? Is it changing our admission systems, our financial systems? What are the cascading effects of this innovation in practice? Jakob, can I put you on the spot and bring you back to that? Because I think this is at the heart of where you sit with this.
Yeah, well, you stated a lot of questions, so I think it's almost impossible to answer them all. But maybe a little bit on our approach nowadays is that what I said earlier, within several faculties, we have departments working on education for professionals for decades. And what we decided to do is not to create new departments, new structures, new whatever. We decided to really create some sort of, you may call it a virtual network of all those departments together, set up a governance structure around that virtual network, so that we have now people from several faculties, but also, of course, then several backgrounds, managing a joint agenda together. So when we go out together. When we go to our board to get things done around our own HR policy, because then we do it together. And of course, we suffer from all the obstacles that probably you all suffer from or are working on. But by debating with our board all those obstacles together, we are really making progress. There's not a lack of lecturers or professors that want to work on education for professionals or lifelong learning, but if they do so now, it will kill their academic career, because they're not writing enough articles or making enough hours as a lecturer, etc. So that is what we are trying to solve together. But that same approach, we also use it to go outside. We'll have loads of networks with companies and all sorts of loads of networks. And how can we now also present ourselves or become a partner for all those institutions and companies so they can be assured that when they ask us a question, we can get things done, because we lack execution power. And so a lot of the questions from outside that come inside, that they are not worked upon. So and that is a real problem for companies that rely on our capacity. So we created this network, and we have really translated into working processes. So we also faculties without a department focused on lifelong learning, we do the work for them. We do the background administration. So we really set up the background organization for that. So now we can focus on going outside. So that's what the strength of our network should be. And of course, as I said earlier, we have all the obstacles, of course, that we all have. But I think we really have made progress on that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jacob. I'm going to go to your neighbour university, to Rob, and see how does that sit with you? Is this different, similar to where you are?
No, I'd like to add to what Jacob was saying, and also give an example how we're trying to get to the next level. In our region, so which is the same. So we are in Nijmegen and Arnhem, and Nijmegen is where Radboud is located as well. And we are working on a human capital plan for the semicon industry. So in our region, we have a strong semicon industry, and they too have an enormous problem with human capital. They have a shortage of new young bachelor master students. But also they need to upskill and reskill people who are already working in the sector, or people who are working in a different sector but need to be attracted to work in the semicon sector. What we did was we did a sort of triple helix approach. So we started to from scratch, and we did it in a collaboration. So there were people from Radboud University, from my university, but also from the vocational institutes, and they went to sit down with the people, the employers of the bigger, but also the smaller companies that are working in the semicon industry. So they started with a white sheet of paper, and they started to write down what do you need, what can we offer, is this something we already offer, or can we develop something? But then it will take some time before we can offer it. And this together, we came to a plan. So how to have, more than 4,000 new talents who can work for the semicon sector, which by itself, it's impressive. And what I like so much, I work already for 1 million years in higher education, and this is the best plan I've ever seen. I can proudly say I didn't write one word of it, so I'm not, but I'm proud of the people who worked on this. All of them, because the government felt responsible for this problem, for this challenge, but also the companies felt responsible. So what we did was, and this is, I think, the most important, the critical factor in this, is that the ownership of this problem is not a sort of it's not that we're shoving it over. So it's your problem, and so you need to do this, and otherwise we can't do anything. Or the other way around, that they shove it to us, and then they say it's your problem. You need to solve it all by yourself. But it was a truly triple helix solution. Now, to be a little bit less excited, this is a wonderful plan, and it also goes along. I can make a list of things why it's so damn difficult and why it's so almost impossible to get it done. But I think that in this example, it holds the maybe the more crucial aspect, which is the triple helix collaboration, and allowing each other to see that it's a common challenge and not one of the triple partners separate challenge. So that might be, I don't know if you recognize it, Jacob, but at least that's how I look at it as an example.
It's a good example on how also individual institutions let their own boundaries go and work together with the outside world and companies within the outside worlds, and then later on see, okay, and what does it mean for us individually? Yeah, so.
And this is if I may, because this is really what is true, because normally we have a binary system in the Netherlands. So we have research universities and universities of applied sciences. Not every country has this. Most countries don't. But sometimes, since we are in this system, it sometimes feels like, okay, we're doing it by ourselves and the others doing it by itself as well. But once, if you look at the practice for a business, sometimes they need vocational level, sometimes they need a bachelor level, sometimes they need a master level, sometimes they need to be more research oriented, sometimes they need it to be more practical oriented. So in practice, if we look at what the practice needs, what industry needs, then it's often much clearer what we need to do, and it's a hindrance if we are, if you're keeping in our own system and only think from that system apart. I think this was also Felix. You mentioned the 4th generation, even the 5th generation university. This is exactly what I see as a very a clear and a very, very, very wonderful perspective of not putting your university as a sort of the starting point of the universe, but to at least start with your region. And the region can be small and big. I mean, but to take the outside world as the starting point, what are the challenges, what are the needs, and how can we help? So this is this perspective of the 4th/5th generation universities, I think, very important to solve the challenges we see when it's about lifelong learning.
Thank you. Felix, do you want to respond to that? And I'd love to hear from Australian and New Zealand counterparts as well. What's your response to that? Felix?
I was going to say, Joe, I'm curious in the perspective of the other side of the planet as well. So I'll keep it brief. You see, I think it's a matter of I wholeheartedly agree with what the gentleman before me said, and the question is, how do you do it practically? There are serious philosophical disagreements in a university of who's genuinely the business developer in this part. Is that the professor / her or his team, or their team, or is that a strategic business developer who then does it and brings the work in? And that is not so different from any consultancy firm or any business that does acquisition. So I'm also not cynical about it in any means, but anybody who works in the university knows how serious this tension can get if you oversimplify it. And the second is, and I think Jacob, that's what you're doing, and I admire it, is to then just be very practical. Organize a good support system that can support those that business develop, and solve the philosophical matter in the next decade whilst actually getting on with it, instead of, and that makes me think of what you said, Judith, of the university that founded itself 50 years ago as the innovative university, but has at some point long lost that a unique selling point by probably being too internally focused. And that's the risk that we run, that we Rob, because we're struggling with the 4th or 5th generation philosophical part, and who's in charge of what then within that new context, and then don't actually do anything. And that's why I think what Jacob says is quite simply stated one of the solutions. Just sort it out in practice and carry on with what you have, even if that is a very small scale, and don't envy someone at some place in the world doing something quicker or faster than you, which is do what you do. And it feels that I'm oversimplifying, but then again, once we started doing this, we made a progress. So yeah, that's why I think about it. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Felix. Yeah, getting back to the practical, and it's that kind of, it's being explicit about what's the purpose here, who are we serving, and putting the region and employers and the external above what can often become internal fiefdoms, or certainly, the domains that people feel very protective about because they've nurtured them for a long time, and they're measured on those as well. So how do we practically work around those or work through those? I love Jacob's and Radboud's way of not having to change those existing structures, which is flipping hard work, but actually work through them and around them, but with these fluid networks which work alongside. I'm going to hand it over to somebody, one of our Australian New Zealand counterparts. Kevin, you're unmiked. I'm going to go to you first, and then Kylie.
I reckon we might let Kylie go first this time.
Oh, I was just going to say a little bit about, thank you, Kevin, a little bit about that, the approach. So we have a kind of an ecosystem approach as well. So where is the business development? That sits in our external engagement and partnerships, because that's the interface with the business. But it's very closely tied to our careers team, to the opportunities for graduates to work into employment. It's also very closely tied to our learning design team, which is the people who actually design the products alongside academics in faculty. So it has to have a benefit for the faculty facing strategy as well. And I think that's a really important point that I think I've heard from our Northern Hemisphere colleagues, is that if it doesn't have multiple benefits and people can't see the value, it doesn't it doesn't work. And you sometimes have to be quite pragmatic about that. So, you know, the short forms of learning that I talked about before that were business to customer kind of things, like put it up on here and have a look. We can't compete that well there because our staff are expensive. The way that we deliver is probably not as responsive as other non-university people who offer that kind of learning. So we have to really think about where are our strengths and where are our opportunities. And they're delivered through an ecosystem, but they're also part of an ecosystem. And it can, I think, picking up on your point before, Joe, be quite tailored and specific to smaller organisations, but also leverage and reuse our curriculum products. So I'm really thinking quite often about if we're making something, how do we use it as many times as possible? If we're leveraging our expertise in research to offer something to a specific discipline or specific kind of field outside of us, how are we making sure that everyone who could benefit from that understands that we've got that on offer, so that we're not making it for 10 people and then we put an enormous amount of effort into it and make it a high quality design and then never use it again. So that doesn't, so it's that kind of what is the opportunity from an enterprise and external engagement partnership, but also what is the pragmatic approach of how we can compete and how we can offer something into those ecosystems that are outside of the university.
Thanks, Barley. Kevin, do you want to add anything there, or Giselle or Judith? Kevin?
Just give a quick example of something that we're going to do at some risk. And we made an agreement with TAFE New South Wales and announced this in December. But for a series of programs in TAFE, where the students finish their certificate, we will grant them access to second year of our programs, our bachelor programs. And we're going to coordinate this in a way that the students don't have to apply for this recognition of prior learning. The risks are esteem risks, the accreditation bodies, our own staff concerns, but we've committed to this for the benefits of the students, and we think it's a good way to demonstrate transition between the sectors. I'll give you some examples of some of the, well, first of all, it would save a student a whole year of a bachelor degree if they have done one of these relevant certificates. But the financial savings is significant for the students as well. You know, as much as, depending on the program, $16,000 for that student, because TAFE in Australia and certainly New South Wales is free now. And that was a recent change by government. They made fee-free TAFE. So effectively, they're going to get their first year of university for free, as well as a certificate, as well as then a degree. So it's an example where we're doing that. I'm sure other universities will do the same. And this, I think, will be a great thing in terms of harmonisation in our sector and generating more people transitioning into university. So that's just an example, and it works for everybody. The other cost for us is we lose a year of student fees as a university, but because of the student benefit, because of the ability to better service the needs of our professions in our region too, we're going to plough ahead with this. But that's just an example of how we're going to throw ourselves in at an aspect of lifelong learning at Western Sydney University anyway.
Thanks, Kevin. Maybe you want to, Judith put a question up in the chat there. How do you provide the academic scaffolding to support students to be successful? So again, this is turning back to that question of what are the internal changes that need to happen when these external agreements come in, which you can absolutely see why people need the technical practice, vocational skills from the TAFE sector, and then add the higher skills and higher knowledge of the universities. But how does that manifest actually for the individual? How do you think it will go? I know you haven't started yet.
Well, so we have some already, of course, because we have our own college pathway, which is very successful at university preparation. And the students who finish those diplomas go into our second year. How do we ensure ourselves that the students coming from technical further education have had the same preparation? That's a bit more of a challenge, but we have to take a bit of a leap of faith here. And then we have to provide the scaffolding and help. Academic student success coaches, what we use in our college, where we've brought on board this year. There's particular needs in some programs around numeracy, and so our mathematics education system and tutoring is a core part of that as well. There is a risk and exposure to high fail rates in mathematics subjects, computing, coding, accounting, etc. So these are some of the things that are becoming apparent to us anyway for students who make this transition now. But yeah, this is a cost in that regard as well, no doubt about it.
Thanks so much for that. From the Dutch side, thinking about the harmonisation stuff that both Kylie and Kevin have spoken to, with the need to integrate the vocational sector or applied sciences with research universities, with MBOs, with the secondary vocational. Have you got instances where you've adapted to that? Can speak to any colleagues that I'm here from the Netherlands. Rob?
Yeah, sorry. I was very interested in addition to what I just heard. What is the role played by the industry, by the employers in your case, and is that something that you like to see to develop further, or do you think this is an asset and this is already working well? We could take it as an example. I'm very interested in the position of the employers in your situation.
So there are diverse views here. So in general, employer associations want more skilled labour quicker, and they want it to be more practical as well, and more work ready. So that's one set of voices from business. They want harmonisation to assist with lifelong learning. But then there are some business sectors associated, connected to the accreditation bodies. And that things get a little bit more difficult there because they want specific skills and are covered in first year, etc., rather than a volume of learning having been covered in first year. So we do have some challenges with industry, but again, we think the general benefit is such that it's worth taking the risks on these things. But it's diverse.
I'm asking because sometimes in the Dutch situation, I wonder if Jacob and Felix recognize this or not. We sometimes see that employers act as customers. And then they say, we need this, this, and this. Please hurry up because we need them yesterday. And what we'd like to see is to develop into a sort of real partnership. The example I gave is an example where this works. But sadly, regrettably, I can also give many, many examples where it's difficult. And to give an example, we're talking with the employers organizations on national level. My position as the board member of the Union of University of Applied Sciences. And there we find it, well, candidly spoken, we find it kind of difficult to reach the point where we are looking at this problem from a partner perspective, that we're in it together. And then sometimes it's, yes, that's all true, but we don't have time for this. And you need to understand that what you're proposing is too time consuming, and we need this problem solved yesterday, which sometimes then leads in our situation of the University of Applied Science to the situation, but what exactly do you want? Because now you're acting like a customer who wants a product, which is very difficult for us to integrate in our system. And add to this, the customer asks for a volume that is far above what we can deliver. So that's why I'm just so now I'm more or less describing a little bit how the situation is, and that it's not always. I gave this example, but I do realize this is a sort of happy example where everybody is looking at the same way to how to solve this problem. But the reality is also that what I'm now describing is also there. So I'm very interested to see how does this work in New Zealand, in Australia. How is your relationship between, let's say, the employers and the universities?
I might let Giselle and Judith and Kylie make a comment, but my quick first response is that employer groups are generally critical of the standard of graduates, but all of the employers we talk to about our graduates are very happy with them. and that's consistent across the universities. So feedback from actual employers is good, but feedback from the employer representative groups is generally a bit more critical.
Kia ora, I might jump in there. Yeah, thank you. So Rob, it's a great question, and just as Kevin said, you know, the feedback is diverse. For professional programs where there are accrediting bodies, you know, they're deeply interested in the nature of the curriculum and so on, and the quality of our graduates, and they have a stake in that, and they have quite a significant voice at the disciplinary level. One of the things that we've been trying to do here in New Zealand is to really flip the model of the traditional universities, so to place the employer voice more front and centre in regards to new initiatives. Research commercialisation is really a good vehicle to drive this, because we are finding increasingly that students are interested in translating their research into various other forms, whether it is for commercial return or whether it's for social good and social benefit and uplift. And so, you know, ensuring that we are hearing the voice of employers and industry, putting them in the room and saying, what is the problem that you are seeking to solve, and how can the talent that we have in our institution be harnessed in service of that? And then finding ways where we've both got skin in the game, as we would call it here. So we do create more of a sustainable partnership. The New Zealand government here has just released a new scheme of what they're calling industry-based doctorates. So students need to be enrolled at a university, but there's a partnership right from day one with industry, and government is providing quite a significant amount of funding to drive that program. And it's really trying to shape a new kind of PhD, because we've been constantly hearing for years in the universities that employers are saying, our doctoral graduates particularly are in a range of areas too theoretical, and they don't have the necessary technical knowledge to hit the ground running in industry. So we've really got to attend to that, because we have quite traditional ways of thinking about the doctorates. The other thing I'll just add here is that in the last few years, we've developed these entities called workforce development councils, which have primarily serviced the vocational sector, but increasingly into the higher education space for universities, where effectively they are the peak bodies for a range of different industries, and they're seeking to then really determine the key features of skills development, what are the competencies needed in the current employment context, and then how can those collective voices speak cogently to education providers. So we're trying to flip the model of what that looks like. It's tough, it's hard work, because as Felix has noted, you know, classically academic colleagues have a great deal of ownership, and rightly so, over their scholarly materials, and we respect their expertise, and seeking to persuade colleagues, and I'm sure we've all done this, that it's actually a joint endeavour in terms of the work that the university needs to deliver on to the communities we serve. It's tough work, but I think increasingly our academic staff are seeing the virtue and the value of the knowledge transfer and exchange, and particularly when that's reflected back to them in academic promotions criteria, in our national funding metrics, and the way that they're defined, and so on and so forth, in terms of impact and translation. That does help to shift the culture, but it does take time. Joe, I've also got another completely different point to make, so come back to me when you want another spin or another take on lifelong learning from a different angle. Thanks.
I'm quite happy to go with that now, unless anyone else has, because I think that the industry, I think before we move to your different spin, I'll just question and reminder around Kylie's point about the external networks that exist. So thinking there's strong examples coming from UK at the moment, because as a Westminster government hemorrhages all responsibility to the regions of civic centres, so mayoral regions becoming the main glue by which and facilitators by which universities and businesses and vocational education and secondary schools, etc., all talk with one another and co-design and collaborate for the region, which is a little bit to Rob's point earlier on the triple helix model there. So I just wanted to flag that one as another a third player, a third wheel, and a third facilitator opportunity in that. And a Sydney-based organisation was maybe maybe there's scope in there as well. However, we are 15 minutes left to go, so I'm going to bring Giselle in with her let's think differently moment.
Thanks, Joe. It's a bit of a provocation, and it speaks very much to the context of this part of the world and perhaps others. Lifelong learning, I think, is not just a means to optimise employability and workforce capability and meet labour demands, as we've been talking about, but I think it's also, at a higher level, a moral and a civic responsibility of learning institutions. By this, I mean widening participation and access to higher education is a responsibility of civic institutions, and especially in settler societies, such as my own in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Australia, where I think universities carry the weight and the privilege of colonial power. And so I see lifelong learning in this context very much part of an agenda of increasing the participation of all learners, and particularly Indigenous learners and those non-traditional learners who've been historically excluded from the academy, so we can equalise the outcomes, to atone for past historical injustices on the one hand, but also to deliver the opportunity of learning, which is fundamentally a human right, to as many people as possible. And to this point, Joe, I mean, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, our admission system is incredibly open. So you can come to a New Zealand university if you're a domestic student without university entrance if you're over the age of 20, unless you are applying to a discrete professional program. So effectively, the system is incredibly open. Students pay modest fees if you're a domestic learner. So I'm really interested in the kind of access question, in the participation question, and in the equity question. And I'm really interested then in how governments who fund most of us, I'm assuming, can then pay for that, because it is a bit of a zero-sum game. Someone has to pay at the end of the day, and we do need to measure that. So as I said at the top of the conversation, I'm interested in understanding more about this concept of learning gain, this concept of distance travelled, and how we can really land on some realistic success metrics that speak both to an agenda of widening participation, equalising outcomes for non-traditional and traditional learners, and thinking about nuanced ways to measure success that can accommodate a lifelong learning paradigm.
Thanks, Giselle. That's fantastic to bring that in. There's two things I'll pick up on and just open up to anybody who wants to respond to that. One is just to flag that Massey's teams have been doing great work on this distance travelled metric, where obviously with lifelong learners, our start points are all different from wherever we come from, our socioeconomic, cultural backgrounds, and our endpoints, as opposed to initial awards, are also all different. And they've been doing great work in how do we measure the efforts and the achievement that individual learners have put in on their individual learning journeys, which I think will become more and more part of the conversation. It also, I think it also brings me to a question that Mike Eisenbart has put into the chat here, which is around the mindset and the approach of how do we, as universities, also work with our communities, work with our schools, work with our learners to prepare, his words, prepare learners to learn and to develop themselves in practice. How are we, I think Rob, you mentioned this earlier, how are we enabling our learners to learn how to become lifelong learners? So those two questions, I think, bundle into that access and equity and participation, widening participation approach. Okay, I'm just going to open the floor and anybody who wants to speak. Felix.
Yeah, I'll take one liberty at claiming the first spot to speak, and it will be this one. We have recently finished our institutional plan, and in Twente, and I'm quite proud of that. We have representation of students in every participation body, profoundly at the University Council, but also at every faculty. I don't think that's necessarily unique, but we also have a student union, which is the representing body of all the student associations at the university, and they're fully supported by the executive board, also financially, and that helps us to collaborate with quite professionally organized bodies of students. And they actually took charge in this particular topic. if you want us to be lifelong learners, if you want to be a fourth generation university, then you need to recognize and reward student engagement within society, also outside of the university, much more proactively in your curriculum. And to avoid making this sort of a 5-minute pitch talk about how excellent our university is, I'll get to the very point of it. And that is curriculum designers are the ones that are conservative towards this movement, not professors, not regulatory body officials, including the executive board. It is the people who feel that the substance of the education and the end terms and the accreditation and all those things that actually are very, very relevant is what is at risk when you give students more autonomy over their own learning, because it will include matters that you don't necessarily can allow yourself to stamp a degree on. Then again, we're trying to, as Rob already said, prepare them to become lifelong learners. And I think, and I'd be very interested in hearing some of the, I mean, in terms of experience, of course, very senior members in this panel reflect on that question. If we allow students to become masters of their own lifelong learning, that will include things that they want to learn and associate with university, that we necessarily, it's not only a matter of principle, cannot necessarily afford in the current system to include in their formal learning. And I'm very curious about what the rest of the panel thinks about this, but that is what I think, Joe, is the main challenge. And I wish I could give a clear answer on this is how we solve this and now it's no longer an issue, but that's not the case. So I'm curious to hear what the other, and I can imagine from and then I'll end this question, that from the perspective that you just painted, Giselle, where it is of the most extreme importance to have people become the masters of their own faith, and that overruling even the principles of, well, we also need to have a proper education by our own standards, and have those merge, those perspectives. So I'm curious if you could elaborate on that specific part a little bit as well, that would teach us Dutchmen a lot of things that we don't hear in our own country.
Great, thanks, Felix. I think just a reminder of, again, Munster Technological University's one of their personnel saying this is about being responsive to the learner, but also responsible to the academies and to government and to regulators. So how do we balance that tension, which is inherent in this conversation? Kylie.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a really, really value the fact, Felix, that you've recentered the learner, because sometimes, and particularly I'd say this is true in the experiments that lots of places have done in relation to micro-credentials and short forms of learning, is that the academy thinks it's really great and the employers think it's really great, but they've forgotten it's actually a triangle of relationships and partnerships, and students or learners have to want to engage with things. They have to see the value for them, whatever their aspirations are, whatever success means to them, to actually want to engage in that. And I think when we don't include learners in the conversation and we don't think about their aspirations and their goals, we do so at our own peril, because we spend a lot of time and potentially a lot of money trying to serve a purpose that students aren't interested in engaging in. And so we need to think about how we position whatever that is in ways that make sense to students and their own aspirations. So not really a solution, but I'm just really glad that you recentered us to that part of the conversation as well, because it's really critical. Yeah.
Thank you, Kylie. We've got 5 minutes left in this webinar. I'd like to just go around and I'm pulling back onto that point there of learners at the centre and the different perspectives that we show. Lifelong learning, all of this, we're all talking about this as it matters a great deal to us, but coming back to that mindset, that motivation question. What are we hearing from learners themselves? How are we engaging? What are the mindset shifts? For me, it all comes back to mindset. What are the mindset shifts that you're seeing that are really surprising you? And what else do we need to bring in here? What else do we need to pay attention to? Rob, no, Kylie, sorry.
Do you mind if I go first again? Because it partly relates answers to your question, but also to Giselle's provocation. And maybe this is a particularly Australian context because we're such a large continent. But one of the things that I wanted to really bring up is a recent innovation that is about access and equity and about students steering their own futures and also responding to their needs. And that is the establishment of a range of regional university study hubs. So these are study hubs sponsored by government and in regional areas, but also in outer suburban areas. They're non-specific to universities. They are accessible to all tertiary education learners to go there. They have a range of, just really basic things like a desk and safety and internet access and sometimes learning support and sometimes IT support and sometimes a range of other services that support students to learn. And when you start talking to people who live, more than 2 hours from their closest university site, these things are actually transformational in the way that we've been talking about in relation to lifelong learning. And regional and outer suburban campuses of universities also serve this purpose. But it actually is about recognising that some of our learners cannot engage with education if they have to travel a really long way. And so therefore, if we're thinking about transformation in that way, if we want to make sure that even employers really gain the benefit of the full opportunity of an educated society and of learners, we need to actually locate some of those learning support opportunities and learning framings where people are learning. Now, I recognise that that might not be the same in the Netherlands because it's a very different geographical location and potentially not even in New Zealand, Giselle, but in Aotearoa. But I think it's a really important thing to say about actually governments can be a source of innovation at times, and that when they see, when the sector takes up those opportunities and makes them come to life, it can actually be really transformational. And it's a different way of thinking about partnerships. So I just thought I'd offer that into the conversation because I think it's a really valuable tool if we're thinking about societal transformation through education.
Great. Thank you so much, Kylie. We've got a minute for everybody. That's brilliant, though. I'm going practicalities. I'm going to go to Jakob because you brought us back to you started off with practicalities. Final words from you, Jakob, and then to Giselle and Kevin and Judith and Felix and Rob, if you'd like to.
My closing statement for today is that masterclasses like these are very interesting. And I hope, Joe, that we continue organizing those, and maybe by focusing on maybe lessons learned already, focusing maybe on a smaller scope of the discussion, we can go a bit more in depth, perhaps, because it's so good to learn from all you, from all the senior experts in this masterclass. So I would really participate further in stuff like this, and then maybe we can set up an agenda for specific topics.
Brilliant. Great. And this is again, thank you for this is a very big open one to start us off because we didn't know where it would go either. So any closing comments from anybody else?
I just want very short because I'd like very much to add to we have the LLO Catalyst program. We have like the fourth program is the learning culture. And I would say also mental note to self that we ourselves also need to be in the learning mode and have the right learning culture in order to be prepared to reinvent ourselves, in order to be the real the partner for, and not only the partner, but also the proposition for the lifelong learning. So that would be the lesson, I would say, at least for myself.
Super. Speaks to Judith's point earlier about innovations and innovating, and are we actually ready to learn? Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'll wrap up there. We're a minute over, which is not bad for me. I really value all of your input and enthusiasm. There are many, many more things we could be talking about here. But for now, thank you so much. We will have a recording of this up online within 10 days or so. And we have our next masterclass, which is a little more focused to Jakob's point, and it's about how is the relationship between alumni and lifelong learning playing out, and what can we do with that? What's the opportunity there? So thanks again to everybody. Thanks to our audience. Thank you for your questions for those that we didn't get to, and see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.